All right, finally, part 5, quantitative analysis, having an interpretive mindset. So when we have an interpretive mindset, what we're doing is thinking and integrating the research evidence that we see into our clinical decision-making mindset. So this is just really what we hope for you as a BSN graduate, that you will include what you're reading and finding in literature to apply to your own clinical decision making. And so expect researchers to provide strong evidence that their results are credible. And that means that the null hypothesis has no merit. At the group level, we look for clinical significance. Sometimes it's called practical. It involves using statistical information other than p-values to draw conclusions about how useful research findings are. And sometimes the statistics you'll see reported is the effect size. We talked about that. So a discussion of effect size, of confidence intervals, and the number needed to treat. These are all ways that people, researchers, talk about their statistics in relation to their clinical significance. Results should be interpreted based on how precise the estimates are and the effect size. In quantitative studies, what you're looking for is results that are called significant. Remember, that's associated with the p-value, because that's saying it supports the hypothesis that whatever the intervention is indeed having a statistical impact. But be careful to additionally looking at statistical significance to see if the effects are large and if they are clinically important. Remember that this analysis is found in the method section. Sometimes there's a subsection, but so the analysis is the plan. That's where our data collection went and what they plan to do with the statistical data, but the actual values are reported in the results. So you can see we're moving right along. Remember that in the introduction, you found a theoretical basis for the study. In the methods, we learn if people are studying this issue quantitatively, qualitatively, and what specifically how they are defining the population of study and how they're going to measure those results, including how they're going to analyze them. And now we're making a move into the R, which is the actual results. And that's where these numbers, including the p-value, the R correlative, which is the statistics of measurement for the correlation study, or the means, which is the descriptive statistics, all of those are reported under the results section of the research report. So look for an analysis plan and make sure that they report if they made sure that the groups were equivalent. And this is one way of testing a group, to make sure that there's no differences between them. For example, many times studies will report the distribution of men and women within each group, a control or a control group and an intervention group. That's one thing, but there could be associated economic differences among group members. You just need to be sure that they considered, are the two groups equivalent? And are they normally distributed? And that's with that normal bell curve. So here we've got an analysis plan, and these authors talk about how they assessed for normal distribution and how they looked at disability using chi-squares. So they must have had a lower level of data, because if you're using the chi-square test, or the Mann-Whitney-U, you are looking at data that's categorical. And here's a test they used, which is used with non-normal data to compare the mean disability scores with different subgroups. So that's 2 or more groups. Notice they didn't say just 2 different ones. And so that's why they used an ANOVA. And then they used a person Pearson correlation, that's an R. So we're looking now at a correlation statistic to look at the relationship between disability scores and quantitative variables. And then they also performed a regression analysis to show predictors of disability. And remember, that's another form of fit to align. And then they selected the significance value here as a p-value less than 0.05. So this is an example of an analysis plan, and hopefully you're beginning to have some insight into the meaning of this kind of description. I know the language is very new to you, and that that is what you're going to need to be able to do next semester to successfully complete your systematic reviews. You need to be able to read and have a beginning understanding of this type of language in a research study. There's also guidelines that have developed so that people can understand the research decisions and statistical measures. And this is done by a consolidated standards of reporting trials. And they have a flow chart for documenting participant flow in the study. So just be aware that there are many external controls and that help guide a research study. And if a researcher mentions that they followed these guidelines, that's a strength of the research report. You might also see if they provide descriptive statistics on participants. Remember, all studies, even many qualitative studies, include these descriptive level of statistics. And then we wonder about means. Means are also descriptive, or they could be a point of an inferential kind of work, but this needs recorded as far as looking at how they're distributed. Is it a bimodal or a unimodal bell-shaped curve in the data? If it's not normal, did they use one of those non-parametric tests? Because remember, all the inferential statistics are based on having a normal distribution of data. And then the p-value that they used was effect size reported. These are all things that are beginning to make more and more sense to you. So do the results reported match the purpose and the stated hypothesis? You wouldn't believe how many times people talk about the research question but then report different data. So make sure you go back and make sure that the reporting of the results relates to the hypothesis. And the results should read like an essay explaining and making a case for the findings in relation to real life. And also tables are very helpful, as we saw in the correlation table. Here's an example of an abstract that gives more data. Once again, in this study, there was a cross-sectional survey design and a convenience sample. So right now we know that, okay, this convenience sample may not be representative of the population of interest. So because they were not random sampled. So they enrolled 117 caregivers, which sounds like a pretty good size number. And then they collected information from questionnaires. So these were the measurement decisions. Now, remember, depression could be considered a qualitative concept, but once you use it in a scale, depression is now a numerical measure. So the fact that they have these scales means that they have a higher level of data, and then they performed a linear regression and correlational analysis. When you hear correlation, you know it's a relationship. It's not a causal, and it cannot be a causal study because we had convenience sampling. They looked at these anxiety scores, and then they report them. And this plus and minus means this is the mean, and then this is the standard deviation around that mean. So they give these interval data there. They talk about anxiety symptoms, and they report these as far as their frequency, right? Because it's in the percentage of people that experience that. But then in the end, they looked at how daily care time and medical payment methods influence anxiety and depression. And they are talking about a correlation, not a causal study, looking at these relationships and the significance of them. So they make a conclusion then that anxiety and depression are common and related to care burdens. And so then they make a recommendation based on their finding of this, the occurrence of these concepts. So hopefully you're beginning to, my modeling of how to read this abstract, you can begin to read abstracts and be thinking about these concepts as you do. The takeaway for today, that statistics do not lie, but people do. So you need to use your beginning understanding of statistics to interpret the story that the researcher is telling you in their research report. Remember that levels of measurement influence selection of statistical tests, and I might add, and the conclusions that you can make about those statistical tests. You need to identify descriptive, inferential, and correlational statistics in the research reports that you read. Thanks so much for participating in this 5-part series.